The Fleetway comics are probably the most underappreciated English language adaptation of Sonic. Sonic the Comic, more commonly known as Fleetway Sonic, was a series published in the UK between the years of 1993 and 2002. And yes, that does mean it was publishing at the same time that the Archie Sonic comics were being released in the US. It's fair to say that while a majority of Sonic fans are more than aware of the Archie comics, Sonic the Comic is relatively more obscure, with the thing that most people are familiar with being a specific transformation that shows up in that comic. The reason for its relative obscurity could be anything from the fact that it hasn't really had any official release outside of the UK, or just the fact that having two separate series going on at once is a little confusing. I've definitely seen other content creators assume that something from Fleetway was from Archie. Honestly, it's a shame that there is so little public awareness when it comes to Fleetway, and I hope to remedy a little bit of this today, because we're going to be going over the protagonists of the Fleetway comics. I know people do want me to cover the villains, especially one in particular, but that will come later. Sonic the Comic, also colloquially known as the Fleetway Comics, offers probably the most unique take on Sonic's lore, right down to unique takes on the core cast of characters. This is in no small part due to what they based the comics off of. Unlike Archie, which used the cartoons as the initial basis, Fleetway used the UK published book Stay Sonic, the ultimate guide to the world of Sonic the Hedgehog, as its base text. And that book was based off of the Sonic franchise Bible. If you've seen the Unraveled video, you know why that's wild.
Sonic is a god!
Also, while I feel like Archie does get pretty wild, even back in the day they would attempt to course correct to stay in line with the games, going to great lengths to ensure games like CD, Adventure, Adventure 2 all fit within the lore. I feel Fleetway does the opposite. It tries to move the games more in line with it. Obviously, the entirety of Fleetway's run with the series is too much to cover all at one time, so for our next topic, we're focusing in on a specific subject, one I'm calling Fleetway Friends, in which we'll be discussing the heroic characters of Sonic the Comic. The villains will be given their own topic in the future, don't worry. The Fleetway version of Sonic was once a brown, slightly less speedy hedgehog. He met the good doctor Ovi Kintobor, who gave him a pair of power sneakers to enhance his speed. While testing the sneakers, Sonic caused a sonic boom, changing him into the appearance we're all more familiar with. Like most versions of Sonic, he's cocky and self-assured and will never give up even in a hopeless situation. What sets him apart from other iterations of Sonic is the fact that he's incredibly rude. He directly insults his friends, he even gives Tails the insulting nickname Pixel Brain. This may not be intended with malice though. Fleetway writer Nigel Kitching has stated the version of Sonic that appears in Fleetway has an inability to properly process and express his feelings, with a feeling like disappointment or sadness just manifesting as anger. He's meant to be like this, he's written with the intent to be a flawed protagonist. And upon further inspection, he clearly cares about his friends. As in the multiple times one of his friends met with their demise, he was consumed by grief and would even blame himself. There is a flip side to this Sonic, but that's technically a different character, so we'll save him for when we cover the villains. The Fleetway version of Tails hails from a land known as the Nameless Zone, where he was bullied for his extra tail. At some point, he would leave his home and end up stuck in Swamp Zone, at which point Sonic would save him. It was later revealed in the comic that if Sonic hadn't been there, Tails would have drowned. There's a couple key differences between this comic's version of Tails and other iterations. He lacks the genius-level intellect, hence Sonic's insulting nickname for him, Pixel Brain, though despite this, he's still an ace pilot. His individual character arc is more about him becoming his own hero, not just a sidekick to Sonic. He starts off fairly cowardly, clumsy, and usually ends up in a situation where Sonic needs to rescue him, but he's his own person by the end of the comic. He even gets his own solo set of stories within the pages of Sonic the Comic. Some are weird, one of which I've covered in depth somewhere else. Tails also speaks bird. Sonic just accepts it. You should too. One recurring set of stories features Tails returning to his home in the Nameless Zone after being mistaken as the true hero of Mobius, while Sonic was mistaken for his sidekick. These stories are heavily fantasy themed, which I think is a fun way to break up the tones between the mainline Sonic stories in the book and these stories. Morain Blackthorn is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics. She is a warrior from Tails' home of the Nameless Zone. She's incredibly combat proficient and always ready for a fight. She's also the sister of Errol Blackthorn, a warrior who joined Tails on an adventure in the past, but has since been turned into a monster by the villain Trog. She, like everyone else in the Nameless Zone, believes Tails to be the hero of Mobius, and Sonic to be his assistant. She joins Tails and Knuckles on an adventure in order to get revenge for her brother, though she mistakes Knuckles for Sonic, but Knuckles is happy enough to play along, even talking up Tails when Morain points out that Knuckles has more fighting prowess. By the end of the story, she's grown suspicious of Tails after he referred to Knuckles by his actual name. Despite her suspicions, much later, she's the one to call him for assistance when the Nameless Zone is being attacked and their leaders, the Enchanter Kings, have been taken captive in a castle. Through this adventure, Morain does develop an appreciation for Tails' fighting ability, though she would never admit it to him. While the end of the story does advertise that Tails would return to the Nameless Zone the following year, the impending end of the comic and the book's diminishing budget prevented the follow-up from being realized. At least in the pages of the actual comic. You'll see what I mean later. Sonic the Comic ran for 223 issues from May 1993 to January 2002, with the last real issue, issue 184, being released June 2000, with the remaining 39 issues being reprints of older stories. However, that technically wasn't the end, and the comic is still kinda going. Starting in May 2003, an online publication called Sonic the Comic Online began being published, picking up at issue 224. While technically a fan comic not officially endorsed by either Sega or whatever remains of Fleetway, it has been endorsed by a good portion of the original writers and artists for Sonic the Comic, including Nigel Kitching, who had been writing on the original comic since the 4th issue. Kitching also has actually written for this comic, specifically the stories In Memory and Exit Sonic. At this point, it's regarded by much of the original Fleetway team and fans as unofficially official. Reason I think this comic is important to spotlight is that a lot of it does enhance the original book. So if you're gonna read Sonic the Comic, this is worth reading as well. It wraps up several plot points. As I mentioned in yesterday's video, Morain returns, wrapping up her story. Right now, the team behind the book have funded their own convention, Sonic the Comic-Con, to celebrate the comic's 20th anniversary, with guests ranging from the original creative team from Fleetway to the current creative team at IDW. I unfortunately can't be there because it's taking place in the UK, and I live in the opposite of the UK. The Fleetway version of Knuckles is similar to other depictions in some aspects, but very different in others. Knuckles was an ancient Echidna warrior thousands of years ago, who would first meet a time-displaced Sonic right around the birth of Chaos. It's clearly set up as a mystery that went unresolved in the original series, though Sonic the Comic Online revealed he survived all these years by having his essence stored inside of an emerald, allowing him to always return to the mortal plane, effectively making him immortal, at the cost of allowing dark spirits to cross from the spirit plane to the mortal plane. Following this, Knuckles would live isolated on Floating Island, not Angel Island, as guardian to the Chaos Emeralds. Over the thousands of years, however, Knuckles' memories would begin to fade, and the memory of his past and how he became the last of his race is lost to him. The first living being Knuckles would subsequently make contact with was Robotnik, who feigned a role as a friendly inventor, attempting to defend Mobius from the evil Sonic, who was planning to steal the Chaos Emeralds that were keeping Floating Island floating. Knuckles had no reason not to believe him, so he teamed up with him against Sonic. Different from other iterations of Knuckles though, he never fully trusted Robotnik, as when Robotnik attempted to absorb all the Chaos energy, Knuckles revealed he had the Grey Control Emerald to withdraw the energy back. Knuckles initially showed disinterest in helping the Freedom Fighters battle Robotnik, but he would relent and Sonic and Knuckles would form an uneasy alliance. From there, the two would occasionally team up, but he would be given tons of solo stories as well. Roughly 8,000 years before the beginning of the plot in the Fleetway comics, the Echidna Empire was one of the most dominant forces on Mobius, both due to their fighting ability and their hyper-advanced technology. However, the Draken Empire, a species of alien fish, would invade and take over one of their sacred emerald mines to store an artificial source of energy of their creation known as Chaos Energy, resulting in the creation of the Chaos Emeralds. The Echidna would then steal the emeralds back from the Draken and set in motion the events that would create chaos and start an event known as the Great War, which simultaneously drove the Draken off-planet as well as caused the disappearance of practically every Echidna aside from Knuckles. Later in the comics, a second Echidna, the villainous Dr. Zachary, would be introduced as well. We don't have a solid answer at this time of what exactly happened to all the Echidna, but Fleetway writer Nigel Kitching has talked about a few unused concepts, such as some Echidna being in stasis on Floating Island, and the majority of the surviving Echidna having been taken captive by the Draken. The latter of which is very much alluded to early on when Knuckles says it's been foretold that his people will return from the stars. Elements of the Echidna Empire still get some references in Sonic media today, such as one of their Guardian robots getting a cameo as a toy in the background of issue 49 of IDW Sonic. As I'm sure many can guess, the Fleetway version of Amy is fairly unique. Much like Sonic, she was once a brown hedgehog. She made attempts to rally the people of Mobius against Robotnik, but could not gain support. This led her to take on Robotnik herself, leading to an accident involving a machine designed to duplicate the incident that turned Sonic blue and enhanced his speed, resulting in Amy turning pink. While she is first introduced as having a crush on Sonic, that becomes much less pronounced over time. In fact, sometimes she appears kind of annoyed with him. Fleetway writer Nigel Kitching expressed that her crush was at least partly to annoy Sonic as opposed to being genuinely interested. She joins up with the Freedom Fighters shortly after her first appearance. Lacking her typical hammer, she instead utilizes a crossbow, which she's shown to have incredible accuracy with. She's also the de facto second in command of the Freedom Fighters, not only understanding effective battle strategy, but the social nuances of being a freedom fighter, like understanding that Sonic is a symbol of hope to Mobius, so it's important that people think he saved the day even if she really did. So it stands to reason that when Sonic's not around, she's usually the one in charge. Amy, like most other main characters, would be given her own solo stories, and would later be frequently paired with Tekno the Canary in a lot of different adventures. Tekno the Canary is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics. She initially was a weapons designer and engineer for Dr. Robotnik, but after it was discovered that she was stealing materials to create her own weapons, Robotnik sent her to be roboticized, only for her to be rescued by the heroic badnik Shortfuse the Cybernik, after which she assists Shortfuse in destroying one of Robotnik's badnik factories. As implied by her work with Robotnik, she's a scientific genius, frequently coming up with new inventions or simply tinkering with existing technology. She also somehow has the ability to fly, despite not having wings. When questioned how she's able to do this, she says it's because she's talented. Which I suppose is something you can't argue with. The first time she would encounter the Freedom Fighters would be during the story Sonic vs. Shortfuse, in which Robotnik briefly regained control of Shortfuse and ordered him to destroy Sonic. The fight is brought to an end when Tekno arrives and breaks Shortfuse free of Robotnik's control. She would continue to work with the Freedom Fighters and would subsequently develop a very close friendship with Amy Rose. The two would frequently go on adventures together, including ones involving space travel and time travel. Because copyright law works a little differently in the UK, the rights to Tekno as a character belong to her creator, Lou Stringer. Despite this, she's made several cameos in the Archie comics, with Amy even identifying her by name, so it's not debatable whether or not it's her, which would make her one of the incredibly few characters who debuted in the Sonic comics to make an appearance in a different comic series than the one they debuted in. Tekno and Amy are the closest of friends during the events of the Fleetway comics. You don't travel the world and subsequently all of time and space with just anyone. By the way, all life on Mobius was created by dinosaurs in spacesuits directly under the employ of some deity. I just accept that. They've done everything from visiting the past, the future, even Earth. This is all to set the stage for me talking about Exit Sonic. Exit Sonic is a story written by Fleetway writer Nigel Kitching for Sonic the Comic Online, in celebration of Sonic the Comic's 25th anniversary, to serve as the true ending of the series, wrapping up every major storyline. The story is set many years down the line in the continuity, so it still allows for more stories to be told by this team. One of the many things that was established to have happened in the many years since the core story is that Amy and Tekno went on one more adventure together, starting a family. I'm allowed to be cheesy sometimes. But yeah, in the time that had passed, Amy and Tekno had gotten together and adopted a child, to which Sonic is the godfather. We don't see them, unfortunately, as the story had already ran longer than planned. Initially was only going to be 7 pages, but was expanded to 17, so there wasn't time to fit them into the story concisely. But I think it's a really cute idea. Look, I've never solicited fan art in these videos, and I don't plan to start, but no one has drawn their family, and I think someone should. Johnny Lightfoot is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics, based on the rabbit or Pocky that is released from destroyed badniks in the games, and first named in the Sonic franchise Bible. He begins the comic closely resembling his game counterpart before his design changed in issue 21. Funnily enough, this design closely resembles him in a very early pitch for Sat AM he was included in. He's a founding member of the Fleetway Freedom Fighters, and despite him expressing a desire to have his own solo adventures, the book would never give him his own self-titled stories, with stories following him just going under the title Sonic's World, and often featuring other main characters. At one point, a villainous turn for Johnny is teased by the comic, revealing him as the villainous Agent X. However, it's revealed he isn't really Johnny, but a shape-shifting creature from the Shadow Dimension that kidnapped Johnny and replaced him. Originally, though, writer Lou Stringer wanted this to actually be Johnny, but writer Nigel Kitching vetoed the idea, thinking Johnny was too nice to ever do something like that. However, none of that is what Johnny has really become known for, but I'll save that for tomorrow's video. Johnny Lightfoot meets a fate that not many Sonic characters do. Near the end of Sonic the comic adapts Sonic Adventure. The Freedom Fighters come into contact with Chaos, who is practically invincible. One of the more scientifically minded Freedom Fighters, Porker Lewis, finds that Chaos is made of Chaos energy and begins to work on a device to dissipate it. Unfortunately, as the device is reaching completion and Chaos is approaching, a wire becomes disconnected, leading Johnny to rush in and fix it. While he succeeds, he's attacked by Chaos. After the machine dissipates Chaos, Sonic begins to celebrate their victory, only to find that Johnny did not survive Chaos's attack. This sends Sonic into a deep depression, blaming himself for what happened to Johnny. Sonic the Comic Online expands on how his loss affected everyone. Issue 227 features a nightmare creature disguised as Johnny to feed off Amy's fear and grief, while issue 242 establishes that Sonic has now developed a phobia of failing to keep the people he cares about safe. But the most notable addition is the story Fleetway writer Nigel Kitching wrote for Sonic the Comic titled In Memory, which features Sonic and Tails meeting time-displaced versions of Sonic and Johnny. While Sonic grows irritated with his younger, more irresponsible self, Johnny discovers the monument that was built in his memory, as well as finding out that he won't survive his time as a freedom fighter, which is something he accepts, meaning that when he rushed in to stop Chaos, he knew there was a decent chance that was it for him. Porker Lewis is one of the characters who appears in the Fleetway comics. Like Johnny, his design can be traced back to one of the animals in the original Sonic games, while his name originates from the Sonic franchise Bible. Again, at first he's depicted very close to his game counterpart, but changes his design later on. While he is a founding member and the first tech expert of the Freedom Fighters, he is extremely fearful and anxiety-ridden. Shortly after a particularly bad experience, he quits the Freedom Fighters, much to Sonic's disappointment. While he does occasionally assist Sonic after this, he's primarily then seen alongside Knuckles, as he now lives on Floating Island beyond this point. Issue 128 gives us a peek into an alternate reality where Sonic was never born, and Porker is shown working for Robotnik, completely devoted to the Doctor, assumedly out of fear. While Porker is generally most effective behind the scenes, he has still joined Sonic on a few adventures. Shortfuse the Cybernik is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics. Once a squirrel, he was kidnapped by Robotnik and was forced to serve as the battery to an experimental badnik type, the Cybernik. However, he's able to resist his badnik programming and declare war on Robotnik. Despite his long-term alliance with Tekno the Canary, Shortfuse is hesitant to join the Freedom Fighters, preferring to fight on his own, at one point getting into a fight with Amy regarding her leadership style, as she was critical of him putting others' lives in danger for the sake of the mission. After the first fall of Robotnik, unable to be de-roboticized, Shortfuse struggles to exist in regular society, taking any chance to be a hero again. During the Game Over story arc, Shortfuse joins the Freedom Fighters in battle against Robotnik, who has gained deity-like powers. Shortfuse takes control of the machine empowering Robotnik, and as he manages to destroy it, the power surge from the device manages to free him from his armor. Shortfuse does make a short cameo in the background of an issue of the Archie comics, but unlike Tekno, the comic never identifies him by name. Dr. Ovi Kintobor is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics. He was a scientist who planned to use the Chaos Emeralds to rid all evil from the world. During his experimentation, he would meet Sonic, gifting him a pair of sneakers to enhance his speed and subsequently be responsible for turning him blue. However, due to a lab accident involving Chaos energy and a rotten egg, Ovi would be transformed into the villainous Dr. Ivo Robotnik. This wouldn't quite be the end of Ovi, however, as the same explosion imprinted his brain patterns onto a gold ring, which Porker Lewis proceeded to fashion into a computer to house his digital consciousness. However, this form of Kintobor didn't quite have free will, as Robotnik's assistant Grimer was able to hack the computer he was stored in and transform him into a badnik, though Sonic was able to eventually free him. Kintobor would then appear both in an alternate timeline where he never became Robotnik due to time travel shenanigans, and Robotnik would briefly revert to Kintobor after all energy was drained from him, though this was only temporary and he would soon revert to being Robotnik. Fleetway writer Nigel Kitching's story, Exit Sonic from Sonic the Comic Online, actually writes a finale for the character, though I'll let you read that all yourselves. Another Kintobor appears in the Archie comics, so this one is an alternate universe version from Scourge's dimension. You can hear all about him in another one of my videos. Sally Acorn, though typically associated with the Archie comics, actually does appear in the Fleetway comics, as she was mentioned first in the Sonic franchise Bible. She, like many other Fleetway characters, initially resembled the in-game character she was based on. She's given a larger role in issue 3 of the comics, where her brother Tufty had stolen a pair of Sonic's power sneakers in an attempt to be heroic like him, only to get himself into trouble. While she would initially be seen alongside the characters who would comprise the Fleetway Freedom Fighters, she would never really join the main cast, instead becoming a news reporter, a role she would stick with even through Sonic the Comic Online. The Omni-Viewer is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics. An interdimensional sentient screen, he resides in the Special Zone. He is an almost godlike character with the ability to warp not only his own reality, but others as well. Sometime prior to the beginning of the plot in Fleetway, he befriended Sonic. For a brief period, he was controlled against his will by Robotnik, and after being freed, the Omni-Viewer created the team of the Chaotix to act as guardians of the Special Zone. The Omni-Viewer would subsequently take part in battles against the Brotherhood of Metallics and Sonic's demonic alter ego of Super Sonic. Following issue 100, he becomes a much more minor figure in the comic, not really given any dialogue beyond this point. The Fleetway version of the Chaotix are both natives and the guardians of the fantastical world of the Special Zone. As their adventures have always been limited to the Special Zone, they practically have their own lineup of villains, with only a few instances of them coming into contact with the recurring villains of the comic. The leader of the group, as you expect, is Vector, but much different from the games, he's depicted as very intelligent. Mighty is of course the brawn of the group, and like many interpretations, is shown to be a little temperamental. He has an ongoing friendly rivalry with another member of the group, SBO, over who is really stronger. SBO, as you'd expect, has the ability to turn invisible, and funnily enough, is shown to have a tornado ability, similar to the one he had in Sonic Heroes, despite the fact that the issue depicting this was released 8 years before Sonic Heroes. Charmy B is very close to his modern game iteration, very scatterbrained and childish, much to the frustration of the rest of the Chaotix. Like in the Archie comics, he is depicted as a member of a royal family. Knack/Fang was once a member, but I've already talked about that. So incredibly similar to their game counterparts in some ways, not so much in others. Ebony the Cat is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics. She is a magic user who first teams up with Knuckles amidst a protest to save a forest of sentient trees. She lives alongside Pajamas, another much older psychic. She then would make contact with a depowered amnesiac Super Sonic who was acting uncharacteristically kind due to his lack of memory. Pajamas is able to restore his memory, but his much kinder personality remains intact, though Super Sonic fears that if he uses his powers, he'll go mad once again. Ebony believes that Super Sonic does genuinely want to make a change for the better, so she becomes his friend and caretaker. When Super Sonic uses his powers to save the passengers of a crashing train, he briefly returns to his more monstrous personality. Ebony is almost able to talk him out of it, but the chaos energy proves to be too strong, and Ebony and Pajamas have to resort to magic to restore his kinder nature. Sonic shows up to confront Super Sonic, but Ebony hides him. The next time we see the two is at the end of the comic. Super Sonic, without a regular means to absorb chaos energy, is slowly wasting away. She brings him to Chaos, where he absorbs all the energy from him, saving his life. Unfortunately, this reverts Super Sonic to his evil ways, and Ebony is forced to use her magic to combine Super Sonic and Sonic once more. She, like a few other characters, make a cameo in issue 134 of the Archie comics. Captain Plunder is a character who appears in the Fleetway comics. While he isn't quite a friend, he isn't quite an enemy either. He's a sky pirate whose main goal is obtaining treasure. Due to this, he and his crew have been willing to work with the Freedom Fighters on multiple occasions against Robotnik, as long as some form of treasure was involved, though he has been shown to switch sides if the Freedom Fighters have something he wants. Due to his popularity after his initial appearance, he would be given his own self-titled solo stories in the book, the first of which saw him and his crew attack Robotnik's airship at the direction of Sonic, though Plunder would accidentally be left with Robotnik, resulting in his capture, where he would subsequently meet the reality-warping cat, Simpson. Plunder is also shown to not necessarily be loyal even to his own crew, as when they got captured attempting to rescue him, instead of going back to help them, he just opted to get a new crew. Plunder would continue to run afoul of both the Freedom Fighters and original characters up to his final appearance in issue 108, which saw him stranded on an island with Simpson. He would appear in Sonic the Comic Online, most notably befriending Cream the Rabbit, who joined his crew in hopes of becoming a hero. Simpson the Cat is a character in the Fleetway comics and a member of Captain Plunder's crew. He functions entirely off of toon physics, being able to interact directly with design elements of the comic and paint holes on the floor that turn into pits. Why? He's just like that. How Robotnik captured him is a mystery, but he would shortly escape with Captain Plunder and subsequently join his crew as its cook, work he seemingly enjoyed. His actions very much annoy Plunder and the rest of the crew, especially as he ruins every plan he's involved in. Last we saw of him in the main comic, he had been stranded on an island with Captain Plunder, presumably to bother him further. I've already talked about Tekno and Amy, but I think it's worthwhile to go over other romances that occur in the Fleetway comics, because, you know, it's what this fandom likes. Writer Nigel Kitching originally intended there to be a love triangle in the comic involving Sonic, Johnny, and Amy, in which Johnny would be clearly attracted to Amy, and Sonic growing jealous, realizing he might have some form of feelings towards her. While the storyline never actually developed, Johnny's crush on Amy was hinted on several times, down to it being included in his character bio. Writer Lou Stringer intended for Shortfuse the Cybernik and Tekno to be romantically involved, but avoided going over it in too much detail as he thought including romance in the comic would alienate readers. They really didn't have the Archie comics over there. Regardless, as we know, Tekno and Amy end up together as of Exit Sonic, which was written by Nigel Kitching. One more relationship, this barely counts because it's not really alluded to in the comic, but according to Nigel Kitching, Mighty's dad, Blockhead Bill, was in a relationship with Society Max, a dinosaur with a transforming ability. This feels really abrupt to end on like this, but there's never been any more nuance added to this. Thank you for watching. I'm continuing to post videos daily on TikTok, and if you want to support me, you can do that through my Patreon. It really helps me out. I want to give a shout out to my current patrons, Ned Rex, Tentacle Teapot, and AJ Wigglesworth. See y'all in the next video.